We are all called, man. I think, as we navigate life and trying to find our purpose, is I think the goal of everyone, every human. But at the end of the day, it's our job to figure out how to get back to humanity and get back to this world before we exit. And I feel like God has definitely made that clear in the good book that we are called. And so that's kind of how I live my life, man. And it looks different from person to person. It really depends. And so sometimes we're faced with things that happens to us in our life, or we cross with some adversity that happens in our life, and underneath it all, is what I've learned is that there's some calling in that, and I'll give you an example. My daughter got diagnosed with leukemia almost 3 years ago, and as you can imagine, very tough to deal with. But underneath it all, there is a calling in it, and that was for us to, as a family, create a vision to give back to families who were going through the same situation we were going through, in our fight with cancer, but also their fight with cancer. And so that was the birth of Cleats versus Cancer, and we're going into our third year doing that. And so just it really forces you to look beyond your own situation, your own tragedy, to find, I think, what's the word, the silver lining in it.
Mm.
And, and so I am blessed to be able to have the intestinal fortitude to not, be a victim, but try to find some good in it.
Well, I know your daughter is cancer free. God bless, and I'm
Yes.
happy to hear that. Where does that intestinal fortitude come from, and why do some people have it and some people not have it? And can it be can it be mentored? Can it be taught? Can it be inspired?
I think it could be taught. I think, enthusiasm is caught, right? And so I know for me, where it comes from is I grew up a very poor young man, in a small town called Hungerford, Texas, of 800 people. I remember times when, we had rodents in the house and snakes in the house, and we didn't have heating in the house. And so I slept with my mom and under tons of blankets, and the only heat in the house was in the bathroom, which we would go in there and light the pilot and turn it on, and that's where we would go and get dressed. And so I created, in my mind, a sense of urgency from my life. I don't know if it was innate. I don't know if I had it, if it was in me, but I knew one thing, that I was going to make a difference, and I was going to change the trajectory of the family. And so that's where my intestinal fortitude came from in my mind. But I do think that it could be caught. I think it could be learned. It could be a learned behavior. It really depends on who you're around and what you're internalizing. If you're internalizing greatness, then greatness is more than likely will come out. If you're internalizing, junk, then junk will come out, right? So, um, and I work with student athletes. I work with high school kids as well, and so I see it. I see it every day.
When people ask you, what do you do? What do you tell them?
The
What?
first thing I do is just say, hey, man, I am blessed to have an opportunity to do what I love. And at the end of the day, that is to inspire and motivate people. And a lot of those people are young people. And so if you was to ask me as a youngster if I would be, doing the line of work that I'm doing, if I would be standing in front of adults and doing diversity trainings, if I would be standing in front of, an audience of 800 to 900 young people, you know, in a school assembly, I would laugh and say, yeah, that wouldn't be me, because I was the most shyest kid coming up, didn't want to talk in front of people. But God will take that very thing that you are scared of, the very thing that you're frightened, and turn it around to for your good. And man, what a blessing to be able to come through what I've come through, and to be able to spread the good news, man, and tell my story, but also tell, a human story that, a lot of people come from dire straits. A lot of people come from poverty. A lot of people dealt with hardship. Some of our greatest Americans, man, came from dire hardship situations, man. And I think that's where that intestinal fortitude comes from, so, I watched, and heard stories of my mom and her sisters and brothers picking cotton, when they were growing up, and how brutal that was. I mean, there's so many different examples, but at some point, when you live in this life, you have to make up your mind and make a decision of what you're going to do with your life and what kind of mark you want to leave. One of the other things I talk about all the time is not only the calling but the dash. It's
Yeah.
like, make sure you're living in your calling, but make sure it's something that can be documented, that a legacy can be left behind, a body of work, and so I'm very in tune with that. I try to get other folks to kind of get to that place. And in the Bible, it says there's a season. There's Everyone has different season for everything, and of course, we don't all get there at the same time. But our job is continue to hold each other accountable and continue to inspire and motivate. And then when it's your season, man, hopefully, you're locked and loaded and ready to take full advantage of it.
So when you come in contact with a kid who's, you see some of yourself in that kid. Maybe he doesn't know his father. His mother's on hard times. How do you inspire that kid to believe in himself?
I tell them, I see what I see in you is me, and I give him my story immediately. I almost have this conversation weekly with young men that are backsliding, that can't quite meet the bar, that continues to get in their own way. And I tell them, like, man, I get it. Like, I didn't have a dad. My dad didn't give a damn about who I was as a person in my future. But at some point, you have to get to, a place where you have to decide that nothing else matters, right? No one's gonna care. No one's gonna care. So you have to care enough to give yourself an opportunity. And by doing that, that means what I'm talking about is going to class, being coachable, doing what you're supposed to do, being on time, doing your homework, getting on the Zoom calls when you're supposed to be on them, and being present with your camera on. These are all the ingredients to you being successful, but no one's going to care that you grew up in a hardship and you didn't know your father, or no one's going to care that you're living below the poverty line, you know, and that's just what it is. As soon as we can understand that, the quicker we can become, the kind of people that we want to be, and be the vessel that we're supposed to be. But so often we spend our time playing the victim. Oh man, I didn't, this happened and this happened to me, and I've gotten to a place in my life when adversity hits or something doesn't go right. The first thing I do is try to find, okay, what's the solution in this? Like, what's God trying to tell me here?
First of all, I have to say, if part of your message is nobody cares, the fact is you care and they know you care. And I think that's part of being a great coach. And Greg and I have talked a lot about coaching, and it's way more than X's and O's and where to be in a certain point on the field. If you're going to coach, I believe, and I know Greg does, and we've all had a lot of coaches, it's the ones who we know care about us,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily how talented we are. I
Right.
mean, at some point, at the level you got to, everybody was talented.
Yeah.
Um, but it's the coaches who impact your life, not just your skills. And when I look at you and when I read about you, if somebody asked me what you do, I would call you an educator. What does education mean to you?
I think that's the key. I think that's the key. For me, it was the key to getting out of poverty. It was the key to going to college, and getting a degree. Wasn't a smart guy, the smartest in the class. Didn't have to be, but because I was willing and able and committed, it was a game changer. And I think, continuing to have that discussion with young people is, if you will embrace education and everything that comes with it, I mean, your futures will be bright. It will be bright. It doesn't mean you're gonna go make $1 million, but it also means you'll have the tools that you need to be successful in this life and to be able to navigate this life. And so education, if I was to sum it up, every education is everything.
Hey, Derek, I got a question for you. And we talked about this before too, but it's when you're a youth like we were, and you're playing sports and you're trying to find your way through, and all you have is your talent. People like you because you're a good athlete. But we both know that you don't really know yourself at that point. So you're looking up for mentors and coaches, and you're getting that advice, but it doesn't mean a whole lot until you go through the process. And I'm always a believer that until you know yourself or you're self-aware, you can't really lead and teach people the right way. But in your story, which is kind of crazy, when do you feel like you kind of, hey, this is who I am. I'm Derek Sparks, and this is what I'm about. And you kind of moved on about all the negative stuff, and you're able to start helping people. When did that happen for you? When did you feel like, I know who I am now?
I think it happened in high school. I think it happened when I was a high school senior and I was transferring from Montclair College Preparatory to Modern Day Catholic. And I saw how the adults in the situation was so hell bent on destroying a young man's dream because he was transferring schools, and they knew that they could no longer use his athletic prowess to kind of hoist themselves up and their school up. And that's when I think I became kind of came into my own as a young man that understood that I needed to do things better than they ever been done, and I needed to have integrity about, you know, about my business and what I allowed to happen to me moving forward. That's when I took ownership of my future, because I realized that the adults who I trusted didn't always have my best interests at heart.
You took it a lot further than that, because first you took control of your own life and your own self-esteem and image of yourself, but you consciously made a decision at some point that you were going to share all the wisdom, hard-earned wisdom, with every other kid you met that was having trouble. When did that become? Greg and I talk about passion, principle, and purpose. There's no question of your passion and your principle. I think you're an extremely principled guy. But when did that become your purpose?
When you're an athlete and all you've done, your entire, life up to the college point, was play the game. Your identity is in the sport. And I remember back then, if you were on a full athletic scholarship, you couldn't even work, you couldn't even hold a job because of the NCAA rules. And so I had never worked a job. I did some stuff with my uncle that owned a kind of a carpet cleaning business, and I would work with him during the summers and stuff like that. But my identity, as many others, are wrapped into, your identity as a football player, a basketball player, or whatever that may be. But when I was in college and I started to, pen, my book, Lessons of the Game, that's when it started to become clear to me, purpose outside of the game. And that's a very hard and thing to wrap your head around when you're, a student athlete and folks are telling you that you're going to be the next, great NFL or NBA or Major League Baseball player, and you buy into it wholeheartedly, and that's your focus. But what they don't tell you is that the likelihood of that actually coming full circle is very unlikely because it's so many other factors that doesn't have anything to do with your talent level.
Hmm.
And so for me, I think my eyes was wide open, and when I started to write Lessons of the Game, it was very um, emotional and therapeutic for me. And some things got revealed to me during that process, with regard to purpose. I knew that that God was going to use me in some way, form, or fashion. I didn't know how just yet, but I knew that was going to be a part of, you know, kind of my new identity. And lo and behold, man, I ended up, you know, sustaining a knee injury my senior year, and how devastating that was as a student athlete, because I knew at that point that my chances of playing in the NFL was that light now got even dimmer. And so I, you know, fast forward, graduated, took a year just to rehab, because in my mind I still had this football identity, and that's what I focused on. Worked on my book, and then um, after that year, had an opportunity to go to try out with the San Francisco 49ers when Steve Mariucci was there. And Steve knew me back in high school, you know, from all the things I did as an All-American, and he brought me into camp. And that's when it all dawned on me that I was not going to be a national football player, you know, and playing in the league, man. What a great experience, but really, it all came full circle. And you know, that voice that you hear, that, you know, that God has something else for you, and this is not it.
Mm.
You know, and I remember leaving that camp, and immediately my purpose was to go ahead and release my book, to go on a book tour. And lo and behold, my purpose was tied to the book tour, because I met a young lady at the time, Mary Clift. She came to one of my book signings in Bellevue here in Washington State, and she's a school teacher. And she said, I want an autographed copy of your book, but also I want to ask you, would you be willing to come talk to my class? And so we talked a little bit about our class, and she's an elementary school teacher in a small town, and so I said sure. End up going to her school, and when I arrived at the school, I remember it like yesterday. I walked into the school, and I signed in, and they directed me to go to the gymnasium. And when I got to the gym, it was the whole school packed in the gym.
Mm.
And at that moment, my purpose was born.
Mm.